As a military member who retired with 21 years active duty, 25 years if you include my 4 years at the Air Force Academy, I am personally offended by the comments that the Secretary of Defense and our current President Trump are making. Although I will say that I do agree with some of it, and I'll go into this. I started to do a deep dive on Secretary Hegseth, not because I particularly agree with 99% of what he says, but because, as Sun Tzu says, you need to know thy enemy. And clearly, Trump and Hegseth are quickly becoming enemies of the military. When you bring in a bunch of generals who have dedicated their entire lives to active duty service, and you start telling them that they're fat, and if you don't like them, you're going to fire them, you are personally making enemies. Trump being a draft dodger, and Hegseth, on and off, in the guard. Don't talk to me about either of you being capable of leading the military. As I started to do this deep dive, my first question was, why is Hegseth making an enemy of the military? What is he so pissed off about? Because it's clear that he's pissed off and he's gone after the military. And so I started to look at his service record and, things that had happened. And, there was this aha moment. So 2021, he was removed from the presidential inauguration detail. And I started to dive into that, and it was because of a tattoo. Although it's interesting that he claims it was over a different tattoo, but the person who reported it says it's actually over a tattoo that says Deus Vult, and I'm probably saying that wrong, but in Latin it means God wills it. It was the battle cry of the Crusaders, and it has since been adopted by white supremacist groups and far left extremist groups. And the person who reported it, especially after the riots on the Capitol, and I'm assuming because it was one of his fellow Guards members, that there was also something about him that made him a security risk. And so they pulled him off the detail because they considered him a security risk. And this is now our Secretary of Defense. Great. So I bought his book. Again, not because I agree with 99% of what he says, but because I wanted to know, in his own words, what it is that he thinks. And right from the beginning, it's clear, and he has said he doesn't believe that women belong in combat roles. Even the subtitle, behind the betrayal of the men who keep us free, like, hello, Secretary Hegseth, it's men and women who are keeping us free. I'm surprised I need to remind you of that, especially given you are a correspondent who allegedly knew something about our military. But there are men and women in combat, and there have been men and women in combat for decades. And one thing that I would say, and I have a lot of respect for her, so this is in no way disrespectful toward Amy McGrath, but she does talk about there aren't different standards for men and women in combat. And while that is partially true, I wouldn't say it's fully true, because to be in the military, you do have to meet a fitness standard. And the fitness standards are different for men and women. And surprisingly, never thought this was going to come up, 25 years later, but I was a philosophy minor when I was at the Air Force Academy. The presentations I did was on women in combat. My argument then was just like things like firefighters. I don't want a person to become a firefighter because we've lowered the standards for them. I want to know that if a firefighter is pulling me out of a burning building, that they have the strength and the capacity to actually do that. And so when I look at combat standards, and what I find offensive about his recent comments is that Hegseth says the highest male standards. And I go, no, they're not male standards, they're combat standards. And this is something that the Army has been trying to do, is to define what is the standard in order for a person to fill this role. And really, it's been laziness, and I'll just call it laziness on the part of the military. But it's also extremely difficult because there is a difference between what we require of a person who's flying a plane, of what we require of a person on the ground who's doing infantry type duties, what we require of someone who is doing administrative duties or finance duties in an office. There are different standards for those roles. Having been military police or security forces, as the Air Force calls it, we were considered combat airmen. And when I went through training, there were men who couldn't meet the standards. I remember we were on a patrol. They had to rally us up because the guy carrying the M60 had apparently lost the butt to his weapon, which, come to find out, it was just because he couldn't carry it and it was dragging the ground. He didn't even know that he still had it with him. As a military commander, this would actually affect my readiness, because somehow the guys at the schoolhouse where they taught the heavy weapons gunners, they thought it was funny to make the 5-foot, 90-pound female the M60 gunner. And I'm sure they were trying to prove a point, but as a commander, getting someone who has that certification, who can't carry the weapon, does limit my ability as a commander. But I had female military police or security forces who were outstanding, who outperformed the men. And so to say that we need this highest male standard, I go, no, let's take some time and actually define the standards. And the women are actually, as far as pulling G's, which is one of the things for a fighter pilot that becomes a concern, women are actually better at pulling G's, just physiologically. But the argument has been, well, if they get shot down, then what are the standards if they get shot down? Okay, what is the probability of them getting shot down? But I've also seen mothers who can lift cars off of their child. We can't plan for every circumstance, but what is the general requirement to do this role? And I totally agree with that. When I was in service, one of the things I would laugh about is we had these strict standards on tattoos. We're also having issues with cybersecurity. And I go, who are the people who are the best at cybersecurity? Do they likely have tattoos? Do they likely have piercings? Maybe we should step away from our rigid standards and go, if we actually want the best people, how do we do that? And honestly, and this is something that I want to think through before I take a stance, because I don't know the best way to diversify our military. But what I do know is that our military is better and it is more capable because it is diversified. We just bring different things to the table. And even if sometimes it's the should we really be going to war? That can be something that a person brings to the table. This kind of goes back to the other things I've been talking about. For a person to say that women don't belong in combat roles, you're short-sighted. You don't know the women that are fighting in combat roles currently and what they're capable of. And to say things like, oh, our white sons and daughters are thinking they're not wanted because of these diversity initiatives. And again, I don't know, what the right answer is yet. I'm trying to figure it out, and I want to involve everyone in the solution. But I'll tell you that the military is equal opportunity. We will send anyone off to die. So to think that the reason our white sons and daughters are not signing up for the military is because they don't feel wanted. Let's talk about woke for a second, Secretary Hegseth, because I think that's a pretty woke statement if you're saying our white sons and daughters aren't joining the military because they don't feel wanted. I think it's because they don't want to do the things that the military is asking them to do, because there's a lot of sacrifice and there's a lot of hard work, and I think a lot of times our white sons and daughters are too entitled to do the work that we're asking them to do. It just goes back to the same argument that we make about our immigrants stealing our jobs. This isn't about our white sons and daughters not feeling wanted. I'm asking for some common sense when we are evaluating what these leaders are saying, and to not eat it, and to actually listen to people who've been on the ground, who have been serving in our military, who have been in combat roles, who have led soldiers in combat, instead of listening to some talking headpiece who doesn't know what they're talking about. This is all about inclusion. This is all about valuing everyone. And if our leaders can't value everyone, they don't deserve to be our leaders. And this is what I'm talking about when I talk about America choosing love. Choosing love is valuing every person for what they bring to the fight.